Usually when we sit down to prep for these deep dives, we're looking for the consensus.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
trying to find that middle ground, the center of the bell curve. What's the agreed upon reality?
A comfortable narrative.
Exactly. The comfortable one. We'll look at the New York Times, the BBC, maybe some specialized stuff, and we try to build a view of the world that feels, well, that feels understandable.
And that's the key word, isn't it?
Okay.
Comfortable. We like stories that fit the shape of the world we think we live in.
But this
Yeah.
stack of documents you dropped on my desk this morning, this is not comfortable.
No.
It's not even on the same chart. Today, we are looking at the world entirely through the eyes of, well, the adversary.
We are.
And I have to say, reading through this transcript,
Yeah.
it's a conversation between Professor Glenn Deason and Stanislav Kripivnik. It felt like I was reading a transmission from another dimension.
It feels that way because it's something we almost never do. In military wargaming, what we're doing today has a name. It's called red teaming.
Red teaming.
Yeah. If you want to understand, let alone defeat, your opponent, you can't just look at the board from your own side of the table. You have to physically get up, walk around to their chair, and see the pieces the way they see them.
You have to get inside their logic.
Their logic, their fears, their strategic map, everything.
And the view from that chair is, well, it's honestly pretty unsettling. We're unpacking a very dense, and I have to say, a highly controversial conversation.
Extremely.
And the source, Stanislav Kripivnik, he's a fascinating character in his own right. For context, he was born in the Donbass, moved to the U.S., served as an officer in the U.S. Army, and then
Went back to Russia to work as a military analyst.
which gives him this dual lens view that you just don't see.
It's incredibly rare. He knows the Pentagon's acronyms. He knows the culture inside a U.S. officer's mess. He knows the tactical manuals inside and out. But he's processing all of that through a Russian geopolitical framework.
So he's not just guessing what the West is up to.
No, he's analyzing it with insider knowledge, but with an outsider's hostility.
And the picture he paints, it isn't just about a disagreement over borders or, trade tariffs. He describes this clash between two massive global operating systems.
The Western Empire versus the Eastern synthesis.
And he believes these two systems are on a collision course that is far, far more advanced than most of us realize.
And synthesis is the word we're going to keep coming back to today. We're essentially going to cover, I think, 3 main pillars from this source.
Okay.
First, the military tech. Specifically, why the U.S. might be walking into a data trap in the Middle East that could render our best, most expensive assets vulnerable.
Right. Then what?
Second, the psychological profile of Western leadership, which gets incredibly personal and, frankly, it gets quite dark.
Yeah, that does.
And third, a terrifying economic theory that suggests the U.S. economy doesn't just benefit from a European war. It actually needs Europe to burn to the ground to save itself.
It's like the theory of everything for World War III. And I
Not
want to be
bad.
really clear with you before we dive.
Go ahead.
We are not endorsing these views. Kripivnik says some things that are offensive, some things that sound like wild conspiracy theories, and some things that are just cold, hard strategic calculus.
But our mission today is to strip away that filter.
Exactly. If you want to know why the other side isn't blinking, why they aren't backing down,
Yeah.
this is the logic they're using.
This is the raw data coming out of their planning rooms.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with that immediate friction point. The Middle East. We all see the carrier strike groups moving in. We hear the rhetoric about potential strikes on Iran.
Right.
The standard narrative, the one we hear every night, is that the U.S. has overwhelming dominance. If we wanted to, we could dismantle Iran's defenses in, a weekend?
That's the assumption. But Kripivnik says the West is operating on a mental map from 2003.
Yeah.
From the Iraq War.
And things have changed.
Massively. The assumption in Washington, in London, is that Iran is a silo. It's a rogue state, maybe dangerous, but ultimately it's isolated. Kripivnik argues that's completely wrong.
What's his take?
He says Iran has been effectively annexed into the defense architecture of Russia and China. It's not a country in a vacuum anymore. He calls it a platform of integration.
A platform of integration. So what does that mean in practice? They're not just sending, cash or political support.
No. We're talking about hardware and, much more importantly, software integration. Let's look at the air defense picture because this is where that synthesis really comes to life.
Right.
Everyone knows Iran has the S-300s. They've had those for a while. They're good, solid systems. But Krapivnik points out that Russia has surged S-400 systems into the
The
country.
next generation up.
Right. And he strongly implies the S-500 or maybe even the S-550 architecture is being laid down as we speak.
Okay, hold on. For the listener who isn't, reading Jane's Defense Weekly over their morning coffee, what is the functional difference? S-400, S-500. Is it just a bigger number, or is it a different kind of beast?
Oh, it's a different beast entirely. It's about altitude, speed, and the kind of target it's designed to kill. The S-400 is your classic long-range area denial system. It'll kill jets, bombers, cruise missiles out to 400 kilometers. It's a very, very scary system.
Right.
But the S-500, the Prometheus, that's designed to hit targets in near space.
Near space.
We're talking about intercepting hypersonic missiles, ballistic missile warheads, and even low-orbit satellites.
So they're not just locking the door at 30,000 feet. They're bolting the door at the edge of the atmosphere.
That's exactly it. It creates this multi-layered umbrella. You've got the strategic layer on top, the S-500s and S-400s, handling the big, fast, long-range threats.
And then below that.
Then you have the theater level, the local level, and right at the bottom you have point defense. Things like the Pantsir system, which is designed to shoot down a drone or a helicopter that manages to sneak through all the big stuff.
It's like an onion.
An onion of doom, yeah.
Right.
Every layer you peel back, there's another one waiting.
But the missile is just the bullet. You need the gun. And the gun is the radar. This is where the conversation got really technical and, to me, really interesting.
This is the crucial part.
Krapivnik claims China has integrated its own radar network into this whole Russian-Iranian shield. And he was specific. He mentioned low wavelength or low frequency radar arrays.
And that is the critical countermove to America's biggest advantage, stealth.
I caught that. He said they can track targets 5, maybe 6,000 kilometers away.
Yeah.
But, the U.S. spends billions, hundreds of billions on stealth. The F-35, the new B-21 Raider, the entire selling point is that radar can't see them. Is he just saying stealth is a hoax?
Not a hoax, no. But he's saying that physics has limits. Think of it like this. Stealth works by deflecting high-frequency radar waves.
Okay.
The kind used by a fighter jet's own radar or a standard fire control radar on the ground. The plane's shape is designed to scatter that wave, so it looks like a bird or, a golf ball on the screen.
Right.
But low-frequency waves, we're talking VHF, UHF, L-band, they are different. They're long, rolling waves.
Like a tsunami versus a ripple in a pond.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And when those long waves hit an aircraft, even a stealth one, they cause something called resonance.
What's that?
Because the wave is physically longer than, say, the tail fin or the edge of the wing, the aircraft can't deflect it properly. The structure itself, sort of, it vibrates electronically in response to the wave.
So to these giant Chinese radars, the F-75 isn't invisible.
Not at all. It's a distinct glowing blob on their screen.
But I always thought the downside of those big low-frequency radars was accuracy. You can see something is there, like, hey, there's a blot over the Mediterranean, but you can't get a good enough lock to fire a missile at it. The resolution is too fuzzy.
And historically, that was the trade-off. You're absolutely right. You had your search radar, which was low frequency, and your fire control radar, which was high frequency. Stealth beat the fire control radar, so you couldn't get shot.
So what's changed?
Krapivnik says that's where the data link changes the entire game. This is the synthesis he keeps talking about.
Okay, walk me through that. Paint the picture. A U.S. pilot is on a mission.
All right. An F-35 takes off from a carrier in the Med. Instantly, a Chinese satellite or a massive strategic radar deep in the Iranian desert picks up that blob using those low-frequency waves.
So they know he's there.
They know exactly where he is, his speed, his altitude, even if they can't lock a missile onto him yet. They are tracking that path.
And that data.
That data isn't just sitting on a screen in some command bunker in Tehran. It is being beamed instantly via a high-speed data link to a Russian S-400 battery sitting silently in a mountain valley 300 miles away.
And that S-400, its own radar is...
It's off. Completely cold.
So the F-35 pilot, his sensors don't pick up any threat. He thinks he's totally undetected.
He sees nothing. His radar warning receiver is silent. He's flying deeper and deeper into the trap, completely blind to what's waiting for him.
Because the S-400 already knows where he is.
The S-400's computer knows exactly where the plane is, thanks to that Chinese data feed. It just waits. It waits until the jet is deep inside its maximum lethality kill zone. It pre-calculates the firing solution without ever making a sound. And then, and this is the killer move, it flips on its engagement radar.
And since it knows exactly where to look...
It achieves an instant lock. We're talking a matter of seconds. The pilot gets a warning tone in his headset, and 3 seconds later, a missile is already going terminal. There's no time to jam, no time to maneuver, no time to do anything.
Wow.
Kripivnik calls this the fatal arrogance of the West. He's convinced that U.S. military planners are still banking on a stealth technology that has been rendered obsolete by network integration and raw computing power.
So it's the network that kills you. It's not just the missile.
It is the synthesis, and it's not just a defensive picture. Kripivnik drops a very specific detail about the Russian Su-35 fighters that are being delivered and integrated. He calls them Generation 4++.
Which, to me, always sounds like marketing speak for almost as good as the new stuff, but not quite.
And in Western marketing, that's exactly what it means, yeah. We fetishize Generation 5, the F-35, the F-22 because of stealth. That's the magic ingredient.
But Kripivnik says,
He argues that if stealth is negated by the radar grid we just talked about, then the game changes. In a pure dogfight or an intercept, he claims the Su-35 is actually superior to the F-35.
oh so.
It has massive engines, it has thrust vectoring, which means the nozzles on the engines can move, so it can practically flip and turn like a UFO. And crucially, it carries a much heavier payload of longer-range air-to-air missiles.
So if you take stealth off the table,
Then you are left with a relatively slow, heavy American F-35, which is basically a flying computer going up against what is essentially a Russian muscle car of a jet that can outfly, outturn, and outshoot it.
So his argument is that the U.S. has built a force designed to kick down the door of a third world country.
Exactly. Not to fight a peer adversary that has integrated networked systems.
He even took a shot at the reliability of U.S. offensive tech. He brought up the Tomahawk strikes on Syria, the ones under President Trump. I remember the headlines, "Shock and awe," all the footage of the night launches.
Kripivnik remembers it very differently. He claims that Russian intelligence assessments on the ground showed a 33% failure rate for those missiles.
33%.
And he was specific. He said they weren't shot down. This was technical failure, failure to navigate, failure to detonate. He said they found warheads just lying in the desert, unexploded.
And his point is what?
His point is that complex, high-end Western tech is delicate. It requires perfect maintenance, perfect conditions, perfect software, Russian and Iranian tech. It's designed to work in the mud, in the desert heat when the world is ending. It's robust.
So if you're a U.S. admiral or a planner in the Pentagon, and you believe even half of what Kripivnik is laying out,
Yeah.
you're not just planning a strike on Iran.
No, you are contemplating walking into a layered, integrated trap set by 3 nuclear powers.
Which brings up the really big question. If the tactical risk is that high, why is the strategic rhetoric from the West still so aggressive? Why would you push for a fight you might actually lose?
And this is where the conversation pivots. It pivots from engineering to psychology.
Right.
Because Kripivnik doesn't believe Western leaders are making a rational military calculation. He thinks they are acting out a deep-seated psychological complex.
He moves away from the idea of strategy and starts talking about pathology.
He calls it the cult of empire. And he absolutely zeroes in on Senator Marco Rubio as the archetype for this entire mindset.
That was a very specific, almost literary kind of attack. He didn't just critique Rubio's policies, he went after his ancestry, his lineage.
He did. He analyzed a speech Rubio gave in Munich, where Rubio was lamenting the loss of what he called the imperial capacity of Europe. He was basically complaining that Europe doesn't know how to project power anymore. Kripivnik connects this directly to Rubio's ancestry. He claims, and this is his claim, that Rubio descends not from the Cuban working class, but from the old Spanish viceroy class, the colonial administrators in Cuba.
The middle managers of the Spanish Empire.
Exactly. The people who believed they had a divine right, a blood right, to rule over the peasantry. Kripivnik argues this isn't just ancient history, it's a deep-seated psychological drive.
The kind of inherited worldview.
He believes that men like Rubio view the world as a natural hierarchy, and in that hierarchy, the U.S. must be the viceroy. The idea of a multipolar world where China or Russia or India are equals isn't just a policy failure to them, it's a profound insult to the natural order of things.
So when you hear someone like Rubio or Secretary Blinken talk about the rules-based international order,
Kripivnik hears the viceroy's rules.
I make the rules, you follow the rules.
Precisely. And he argues this mindset leads directly to the big bully's strategic error. Because they see themselves as the rightful rulers, they think the only solution to disobedience is more punishment, more sanctions, more threats, more bombing. But in the schoolyard of geopolitics, if the big bully starts punching too many other kids, eventually the kids get together and organize.
They form a counter-coalition.
Yes. And it's not just the big ones we know about, Russia and China. He throws in some wild cards that really surprised me when I read this.
India was the big one for me.
A huge pivot in his analysis. The conventional wisdom in D.C. is that the West is successfully wooing India to be a counterweight to China.
Yeah, the whole Quad Alliance. We sell them drones, Modi gets a state dinner.
Krapiknik says, look closer. He claims that Modi and Trump had a massive personal falling out over trade. He says Trump's transactional mercantile attitude deeply insulted the Indians.
He used that exact phrase, mercantile attitude.
He did. Trump looked at the trade balance sheet and just said, you owe me money. Krapiknik argues this pushed India away hard, and now he sees India acting as a cheerleader for multipolarity.
And he said Russia's actually brokering peace talks between India and China.
Yes. To solidify this new bloc.
I mean, that is the absolute nightmare scenario for the Pentagon and for State Department planners. If India and China stop staring each other down across the Himalayas and instead turn back to face the rest of the world, that changes the entire strategic math of the 21st century.
It completely breaks the West's containment strategy. You can't contain Eurasia if the three biggest powers, Russia, China, and India, are all aligned against you.
And it doesn't stop there. He brought up Pakistan.
And this is the truly terrifying domino to fall.
Nuclear threat.
Yes. Krapiknik claims that Islamabad has sent a back-channel message to Tehran, and the message is simple and horrifying.
What is it?
It's essentially, we are a Sunni power, and you are a Shia power, and we have our differences. But if Israel uses a nuclear weapon on you, we will view that as an attack on the entire Islamic world, and we will use our nuclear weapons on Israel in retaliation.
So, it's mutual assured destruction, but franchised out to the Middle East.
It just highlights the insane interconnectivity of it all. You kick a stone in Tehran, and you trigger an avalanche in Islamabad, which triggers a landslide in Beijing and Moscow.
And Krapiknik is basically screaming that the West doesn't see these tripwires. They think they can conduct a surgical strike on a facility in Iran and then go home.
And he's saying that's not a surgical strike. That's the opening bell of World War III.
So we have this picture of a U.S. leadership that he claims is trapped in an empire delusion. But then he turns his gaze to Europe, and the diagnosis shifts from delusional to something more like degenerate.
He did not hold back.
No, he really didn't. He called the entire European political class an inbred aristocracy.
Gold sinks, but crap flakes to the top. That was the specific phrase he used.
It's brutal. But what does he actually mean by that? Is it just a playground insult?
No, I think it's a structural critique. He paints this picture of a negative selection process that's taken hold in European democracies over decades.
How so?
He argues that in the post-World War II era, specifically living under the U.S. security umbrella, European politicians didn't actually need to be competent. They didn't need to be good at strategy or industry or war.
They just needed to be compliant.
They just needed to be good managers of the status quo and compliant with Washington's directives.
He really went after Kakalis, the EU foreign policy chief. He kept calling her Captain Estonia.
It was a piece of dark humor, but it was very revealing of his mindset. He mentioned a news report that Russian intelligence might try to kidnap her.
Right.
And Krapiknik just scoffed at it. He says, why on earth would we remove her? She is a walking mistake.
He sees her incompetence as an asset to Russia.
A huge asset. He views leaders like her, or Annalena Baerbock in Germany, or Ursula von der Leyen at the head of the EU, as people who have risen through a completely closed bureaucratic loop.
They've never run a business.
Never fought a war, never managed a real crisis. They've only ever managed their own careers and their public image. He says keeping them in power damages the EU more than any Russian sabotage operation ever could.
But he goes darker than just incompetence.
Yeah.
He brings up that family legacy argument again, but this time with Nazism.
Yes, and this is a very common theme in Russian information warfare, right? Everyone they don't like is a Nazi. But you're right, Krapiknik got very specific here.
He did.
And we have to be careful how we parse this. He alleges that many current European leaders, and he specifically pointed a finger at the head of Britain's MI6, are the biological descendants of people who fought for the SS or collaborated with the Nazis against the Soviet Union during World War II.
So is he implying there's some secret Fourth Reich meeting in a basement in Brussels? What's the argument?
No, it's more subtle than that. It's more psychological.
No.
He's arguing for a hereditary vendetta.
Okay.
He thinks these people grew up hearing stories from their grandfathers, from their families, about the barbaric Russians and the Asian hordes. So when the Ukraine war started, they didn't see it as a complex geopolitical dispute.
They saw it as round two.
They saw it as a continuation of their grandfather's crusade. He argues their hatred of Russia is irrational, it's tribal, it's in their bones.
And this all connects back to his central idea that Europe isn't really sovereign.
Yeah.
That these leaders are just branch managers for the American empire. And that brought us to Operation Gladio. I think we probably need to unpack that for listeners because it sounds like a conspiracy theory. But Gladio was a very real, documented historical program.
Oh, it was very real. During the Cold War, the CIA and NATO set up these secret stay-behind armies all across Western Europe.
And the official reason was?
The stated goal was that if the Soviet Red Army ever invaded, these secret cells of soldiers and spies would activate, they'd blow up bridges, assassinate officials, and fight a guerrilla war behind the lines.
But the invasion never happened. So what did these secret armies do for 40 years?
Well, according to many historians, and certainly according to Kripivnik, they turned their focus inward. They were used to manipulate the domestic politics of their own countries.
Oh.
To suppress popular communist parties in places like Italy and France, sometimes using false flag terror attacks that were then blamed on the left. Kripivnik tells the story of Charles de Gaulle in France to illustrate the point.
The French president.
Right. De Gaulle was a fierce French nationalist. He wanted France to be a true great power, not a vassal state of the U.S. He did two things that enraged Washington.
What are they?
First, he demanded France's entire gold reserve back from the New York Fed. He literally sent a warship to New York Harbor to pick up the gold bars. Second, he wanted to grant Algeria its independence to stop the colonial wars, which the U.S. establishment hated.
And Kripivnik's claim is?
His claim is that the CIA used its Gladio assets in the French military and intelligence services to try and assassinate de Gaulle multiple times.
To keep France in line.
To keep the empire intact. To make an example of what happens when a major European power tries to go rogue.
De Gaulle survived, though.
He did. He purged the spies, survived dozens of attempts on his life, and pulled France out of NATO's integrated command structure for decades as a result. But Kripivnik's point is this. This is how the U.S. has always treated its so-called allies.
Through control.
Through fear and covert action. And he argues the current crop of leaders, Schultz, Macron, the rest, are the ones who accepted the deal. They are the compliant managers appointed by the empire.
Which leads us to the most cynical and maybe the most plausible part of his entire argument, the economic war. Because if yours is just a vassal state, what happens when the emperor runs out of money?
This is the go east and die strategy. And I'll be honest, this is the part of the transcript that really gave me the chills.
Me too.
Kripivnik references a theory. He attributes it to a 1999 Forbes article. But you see this sentiment in a lot of neoconservative writing from that era. The theory is that the U.S. economy is fundamentally cyclic and debt-ridden. And you have to ask, how did the U.S. become the world superpower in the first place?
World War II.
Exactly.
Europe and Asia blew themselves to pieces, destroyed their own factories, their own cities, and the U.S. sold them the steel, the trucks, the food, and then the loans to rebuild it all.
He became the creditor, the factory, and the bank for the entire world. Kripivnik argues that the U.S. is in a position where it needs to replicate that dynamic to survive its current debt spiral.
It needs a major war in Europe.
A major war. Not a global nuclear war that destroys everyone, but a long, brutal, conventional meat grinder that destroys German industry, hollows out Polish infrastructure, and bleeds Russian manpower dry.
So the strategy is, bait Russia into a war using Ukraine. Feed Ukraine into the grinder first. Then feed Poland in. Then maybe feed Germany in, all while the U.S. stays safely across the Atlantic.
Safe and sound, and selling the solution to the problems it created. Think about it. Russia provided cheap natural gas that powered German industry for decades.
Right.
The war cut that off. Who sells Europe its gas now? The U.S., selling LNG at 4 or 5 times the price.
And the weapons.
Europe's defense industry has been depleted, sending all its old stock to Ukraine. Who sells them the brand new, expensive replacements? Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman.
So in this view, the U.S. isn't defending Ukraine from Russia.
No. The U.S. is using Russia to systematically demolish Europe's economy so that it can swoop in and buy up the assets for pennies on the dollar after the fighting stops.
He calls it a controlled demolition of a major economic competitor.
That is the red team view. That is how it looks from their chair.
It completely reframes the whole conflict. And it kind of explains some of the anomalies, doesn't it? Like, why would the U.S. allegedly blow up the Nord Stream pipelines? That hurt Germany, a supposed ally, far more than it hurt Russia in the long run.
Krapivnik would say. That's not a bug in the strategy. That's the central feature. Deindustrializing Germany removes America's biggest manufacturing competitor.
It's terrifying. And it brings us to the actual fighting on the ground in Ukraine. Because if the goal isn't victory, but just to keep the meat grinder turning for as long as possible,
then the victory narrative we hear in the West is purely for public consumption. Krapivnik dissects the recent Kursk offensive, where Ukrainian forces invaded Russian sovereign territory as a textbook trap.
and the media here cheered that on. Putin humiliated on his own soil. Russia's sacred borders have been breached.
Krapivnik says the Russian generals held the door open for them. They let Ukraine's most elite NATO-trained units drive deep into a pocket, get overconfident, stretch their supply lines to the breaking point, and then the Russians blew the bridges behind them.
They created a cauldron.
A killbox. He argues it was a calculated sacrifice of a small piece of territory to draw the best Ukrainian men and equipment out of their defensive concrete bunkers in the Donbass and annihilate them out in the open.
He threw out a number that just made me stop and reread the line. 100,000 deserters on the Ukrainian side.
100,000, and that 90% of new replacements are now press-ganged, literally grabbed off the streets in Odessa and Lviv by recruitment squads.
He dismisses the Western casualty counts for Russia as pure fantasy.
His logic is brutally simple. He says Russia has something like a 10-to-1 artillery advantage and total air superiority with those massive new glide bombs. In that kind of attritional warfare, the side that is catching the shells is the one that dies, not the side that is firing them from 50 kilometers away.
Okay, but then that leads to the obvious question. If Russia is winning so decisively on the battlefield, why hasn't the war ended? Why haven't they just rolled into Kiev and declared victory?
And this is where Krapivnik offers a really nuanced view of internal Russian politics that you never hear in the West. He claims that Vladimir Putin is the moderate in the Kremlin.
A moderate. That's a twist.
Yeah.
We're always told he's the madman dictator driving this whole thing.
Krapivnik describes a major split in Moscow. On one side, you have what he calls the traitors.
Okay.
These are the oligarchs, the economic liberals, the guys who just want to sell oil and gas and buy villas in London and on the French Riviera. They want a deal. They want the war to stop yesterday so business can get back to normal.
And the other faction.
The warriors. These are the military hardliners, the intelligence services, the ultranationalists. They genuinely believe the West is trying to dismember and destroy Russia as a country. They want to finish the job. They want to mobilize 2 million men and not stop until they reach the Polish border.
And Putin sits in the middle.
Putin is the balancer. Krapivnik argues that Putin has been actively holding the warriors back. He's been trying to fight a limited special military operation to force a negotiation without completely destroying Ukraine as a state.
But he warns.
He warns that if the West keeps escalating, if they allow Ukraine to fire long-range missiles deep into Russia, that Putin might lose control of that warrior faction.
And if Putin goes, we don't get some liberal peacemaker to replace him.
No. Krapivnik says the alternative to Putin is not some pro-Western Democrat. The alternative to Putin is someone who would turn Kiev into Gaza or Mosul. He says the Russian military has the raw firepower to carpet bomb Ukraine into the Stone Age tomorrow, but Putin has held them back for political and strategic reasons. If the hardliners take over, that restraint is gone.
He has this great line for the current negotiation attempts. He calls them McDonald's drive-through diplomacy.
Fast, cheap, and completely artificial. He says the West offers these vague security guarantees that aren't worth the paper they're written on because they still think they're talking to a defeated power from a position of strength.
They don't realize the synthesis has shifted the balance of power.
They're offering plastic beads to what is now, in their view, a global superpower.
And speaking of that balance of power, we have to touch on the direct escalation risks. Because even if this is all just a cynical economic game for the U.S., games can spiral out of control. Krapivnik points to the Baltic Sea as the place where the match could get lit.
This is the most immediate red line he draws. There's been a lot of talk in NATO about blockading the Danish Straits to stop the so-called Russian shadow fleet of oil tankers.
To cut off their funding.
Right. Krapivnik is absolutely categorical on this. He says the moment a NATO Marine sets foot on a Russian-flagged tanker or the moment a Danish frigate blocks the path, that is a direct act of war.
Not a proxy war in Ukraine. Real direct war between Russia and NATO.
Yes. He describes Russian destroyers already escorting these tankers. He says if they are fired upon, they will fire back. And he points to Kaliningrad, that Russian enclave sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania, as a fortress packed with hypersonic missiles. He says if the straits are closed, Russia will open them by force, and they have the capability to shut down all shipping in the entire Baltic Sea.
And if the U.S. sends in the aircraft carriers to try and reopen the straits, we're right back to that carrier killer discussion from the beginning.
Exactly. Krapivnik claims there are something like 500 Russian and Chinese satellites constantly overhead. They provide live, real-time tracking of every U.S. carrier group on the planet.
They can't hide.
There is nowhere to hide in the Indian Ocean or the North Atlantic, and with the hypersonic missiles they now possess, he calls the carriers bathtubs full of dead men. He believes the entire era of U.S. naval dominance, of carrier diplomacy, is over. The U.S. just hasn't admitted to itself yet because the carriers are too big and too expensive to be declared obsolete.
So it's this sobering, almost apocalyptic worldview that he's presenting. You have a technologically integrated and confident East, a delusional and crumbling West, and this cynical economic engine in the U.S. that is driving the whole slaughter forward.
And it forces you, the listener, to ask a very, very hard question. When you see the inflation eating your paycheck, when you see the factories closing down in Germany or the mass layoffs in the U.S. tech sector, is that just the economy being weird, or is that the direct collateral damage of this global empire strategy?
And that connects to his final and by far his most provocative concept, the golden billion, or as he corrected it, the golden 500 million.
The golden billion is a standard Russian conspiracy theory. The idea that the wealthy West, about 1 billion people, consumes all the world's resources and keeps the other 7 billion poor on purpose.
Right.
But Krapivnik says the Western elite has now turned on its own people. They don't need 1 billion anymore.
With AI and advanced automation, they don't need a massive Western middle class to work in factories or fill out spreadsheets in offices.
So the people listening to this right now, we're not the beneficiaries of the empire. In his view, we are the fuel.
He implies the word biomass. He suggests the global elite views the Ukrainian soldiers, the Polish factory workers, and even the American taxpayers as interchangeable, expendable biomass to be spent to maintain their own privileged position at the very top of the pyramid.
And that is a truly terrifying thought. If that go east and die strategy he outlined is real, then the slow destruction of the Western middle class isn't a mistake. It isn't a result of bad policy. It's a controlled demolition.
It suggests the enemy isn't just on the other side of a border. It might be the cold indifference of the people holding the pens and signing the checks.
That is a heavy thought to leave people on.
It is, but that's the whole point of a red team exercise, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to stare into the abyss of your adversary's logic. You don't have to agree with it. You certainly don't have to like it.
But if he's even partially right about the sensors and the psychology and the underlying economic strategy, then simply ignoring it is the most dangerous thing any of us could do.
Absolutely. Because while we're busy debating the daily headlines, they're debating the next 100 years of history.
And they are building the missiles to back it all up. Knowledge is really the only shield we have.
We will leave it there for today. Take a breath, process the data, and we will see you on the next deep dive.